Le quiero dar la más cordial bienvenida a este Encuentros del Futuro dedicado a la experiencia antártica. Tenemos dos grandes invitados hoy para hablar justamente de su experiencia en el contexto internacional. Jane Francis, directora del British Antarctic Survey, una larga exploradora, paleontóloga, y Ben Sanders, un explorador que ha batido todos los récords atravesando los lugares donde otras expediciones fracasaron en el pasado. Queremos establecer con ellos una conversación abierta y franca y esperamos que sea de vuestro agrado. Hi, Ben.
Hello.
How do you feel in one of the closest places to Antarctica?
Yes, well, Chile to me has always been the gateway to Antarctica. For me, the last stepping off point. I've always flown there via Punta Arenas. So this is the longest I've spent in Santiago. I've normally flown straight through Santiago, heading south, normally with lots of luggage. So it's a real joy to be spending a bit more time here and meeting some Chilean people, and particularly people working on cutting edge polar science.
And Jane, I know that this is not your first time here. You have been long involved in Antarctic science, and the British Antarctic Survey have chosen Chile as the way to Antarctica. What's your feeling as about to be here, but in a different context?
Oh, it's very nice, actually. Like Ben, I usually go down to Antarctica via London, Santiago, Punta Arenas, and then hop off in an aircraft and go down to our station in Antarctica. So to stay in Santiago actually is really nice for a change. So I do usually spend New Year's Eve in Santiago because that's the kind of time of year that I normally go to Antarctica. So I usually stop off for at least one night. But it's nice to spend a bit longer and to be in the bright sunshine in the middle of the UK winter.
Yes, sometimes I am always run from our winter to the
Yes.
sunny Europe. I have one question that is probably a question. I know the answer, but I want to make it because I know that so many of my colleagues and the rest of my people, I have to say that my daughter made exactly the same question yesterday. Is the Antarctic Treaty at risk in any way?
No, I hope not. I don't think so. I mean, I really think the Antarctic Treaty is quite an amazing organization. I mean, here's one of the largest continents on the planet, and 53 nations go there to do science, and they can all get together and agree to work together in peace and for science. So we have a meeting every year. We discuss lots of topics, some legal topics that we help continue to protect the environment in Antarctica. And we talk about stations, expeditions, tourism, and things like that. And at the end of a 2-week meeting, we have a report that 53 nations have agreed on, word for word, word by word. It's quite a process. And so far, there's no sign that the Antarctic Treaty is at risk. So it is an agreement between all of them, all of the nations that work there. But I think most people understand that it's really important that we at least protect one place on Earth and keep it as pristine as we can. And to understand what's going on in Antarctica, both in terms of climate change and just the natural processes that go on that amazing place. So I have heard people people have said to me, well, is the treaty going to break? But I don't think it will in the near future, for sure.
What can you say about that?
Wow. Well, I mean, I agree with Jane. I think to me, the treaty is an extraordinary example of genuine international collaboration, especially this weird time in the 21st century when and especially being English at the moment, we seem so obsessed by these provincial issues about borders and boundaries, and the fact that this treaty was created at the height of the Cold War, and we know now that there are enormous resources in Antarctica. There's definitely coal, there's definitely oil, definitely gas, there may be precious metals as well. And yet the fact that we've, as a species, that humanity has decided to preserve this place, I think is remarkable and is unique. So to me, there's obviously a really alarming story of the way that the climate is changing and the way that the scale of change and the rate of change is increasing. But there's also an encouraging story of collaboration.
Yeah, you're touching one very important point. Is so many, including me, in our talks, we have mentioned that probably some solutions for the future of the humanity are there, but the speed of the change, or the changes that we are facing is really fast.
I'm not sure the solutions are there, but I think what's really important about studying Antarctica is that, as I mentioned in my talk, is the place where change happens first. The polar regions feel the effect of change first. So if we want to know really what's going to happen on Earth in terms of change, I think if we didn't study Antarctica, we would have a big hole in our knowledge about how the Earth is changing. And not just changing, but how the Earth actually operates, because there's so many, the ways that the Earth operates, the oceans, the atmosphere, all sorts of things that rely on Antarctica being a really integral part of it. So by studying Antarctica now, we can understand those natural processes still, but we can see what's likely to happen in climate change for the rest of the planet. And then I think we can be ready for it, and we can then start adapting or changing or making sure that we do things that are taking into account the changes that are coming. It's a really critical part of giving us a foresight of the future, I think.
Mm-hmm. In terms of exactly what are you saying, there is the feeling in between the scientists that this fate of Antarctica is something that is not possible to twist. Do you believe that? Do you believe that probably the world will agree in the 1.5 degrees stopping this change?
I mean, I hope so. I think also we're an extraordinarily resourceful and resilient species. Of course, there's a huge paradox in the fact that the most intelligent species ever to have lived on the planet is destroying its own habitat, faster and faster. I think Antarctica might be an interesting case study. One of the earlier speakers today was essentially saying that humanity is behaving as a parasitic species, where we're consuming resources of our host, the planet, at a rate that is utterly unsustainable. So at some point, we're going to either deplete the resources completely and reach a critical moment, and potentially over centuries, will it be the case that we then move to other planets? And I think Antarctica is an interesting case study how we might one day approach other planets. If Elon Musk manages to fly to Mars, will he plant an American flag? Will it become, who will own it? How will it be governed? How will it be preserved? So I think Antarctica is an interesting case study of how we, in some ways it feels like an alien planet at times, and I think it might be an example of how we could positively approach new worlds one day.
Some people say that the extreme situations demands extreme decisions. I'm not willing, I'm not support geoengineering, for example. I don't know what do you feel about. Remembers me for other people the movie Matrix.
Yes.
Trying to imagine a world where we modified everything to survive. Antarctica is still a lesson of humility for us. We can't control everything in Antarctica, even the 5% of the factors that could be controlled in Antarctica.
Yeah.
But you as explorer, you have to try to be connected with this reality every day when you cross Antarctica.
Definitely, yes, yeah. And it's funny, when I think about my first expeditions in my 20s, there was a lot of ego. I wanted to sort of test as a stupid young man, 23 years old. And I was so inspired by these stories, this Edwardian stories of endeavour and exploration, and of course there are these iconic characters, particularly in the UK. We have Shackleton and Scott. So I was so inspired by those stories as a kid that I think that was behind my initial motivation. But that's definitely shifted over the years, and Antarctica particularly, but also the high Arctic. There's such unique places, and having been lucky enough to have spent as much time as I have in these places, I think for me now, certainly the next chapter of the journey I'm on is much more about trying to tell the story of what's happening to these places. And as Jane was saying, Antarctica is a unique archive of data. You know, we have, I'm sure you'll correct me if I get the numbers wrong, but I believe there's ice core data going back 1 million years, which is incredible.
Trying to get back to 1 million
You're trying to get back to 1 million years. Which
exactly.
is just
Exactly.
so we've got the most incredible sort of library on Earth, and the idea that we might try and turn that into a factory is just, to me, is abhorrent. Yeah.
So have you seen changes in Antarctica? Because you've been going for some time. Some of the same places. Have you actually physically seen the changes yourself?
I think it's harder, and Antarctica is so enormous. It's quite hard when you're sort of standing there on the surface to notice change in a way that it's probably more obvious to the naked eye in the Arctic, where to travel to the North Pole, you're walking, or you're trying to walk over the frozen surface of the sea, and of course, the rate that the sea ice, the pack ice in the Arctic Ocean is retreating. There's not. So it's very obvious in the 15 years or so that I was traveling to the Arctic Ocean. Very obvious. You know, in 2001. We started from the north coast of Russia. There's a string of islands off the north coast of Siberia. And we started from the northernmost island, and we were able to walk straight onto the ice. We walked off the land onto the sea. And I went back to the same point 3 years later, and there was 20 kilometers of open water at the same time of year. And people said, oh, well, it's a freak year. The ice will be back next year, and it never came back. So the sorts of journeys that I've done, are becoming impossible over sea ice. So the change in the Arctic is obvious to someone like me I'm not an academic, I'm not a researcher, I'm just seeing these places at first hand. So the change is very obvious. Antarctica, I think, is more subtle. From my own experience, the change I've seen in recent years is more to do with the weather in the spring and the summer. It seems to be getting milder and warmer, and you would think that would make things easier for me, trying to travel down there on foot. But actually, it seems to have led to more cloud cover, to more precipitation, more snow, mist and fog and cloud and
even
falls.
rains.
And rain.
Rains in Antarctica. I mean, that's really unusual, and all of our tents and a lot of our field gear and the clothes we wear are windproof to keep the cold out. They're not waterproof, and suddenly we've got wet tents.
Jen, I want to go back to this idea, but we are going for a short break. Vamos a ir a un breve corte. Vamos a continuar con la conversación con nuestros panelistas Ben y Jane, así que los esperamos de regreso. Bueno, ya estamos de regreso. Para los que se vienen incorporando a la sintonía, estamos conversando con Ben Saunders, un famoso explorador antártico, ha atravesado la Antártica por la ruta de otros exploradores, muchos de ellos fracasaron y murieron. Estamos con Jane Francis, directora del British Antarctic Survey, paleontóloga, también exploradora, y nos han venido a contar un poco su experiencia. En realidad estamos intercambiando opiniones. We are exchanging opinions and thoughts about Antarctica from different dimensions. Of course, my perception is from somebody who lived and who taking a plane. We are just in 1.5 hours in Antarctica. What's your feeling? You are crossing half of the world to come every year for explore this vast continent.
Well, it's worth it. It's definitely worth it. Well, actually, it's got much quicker and quicker as the years have gone by, and now it's quite easy to get to Antarctica. We have a small aircraft that takes us from Punta Arenas to our station in Antarctica. And then we have ships to go and do science on the ocean, and the ocean is just as important as the land. So it is still an area which takes an awful lot of logistic equipment, heavy equipment, but also planning. I mean, to undertake a project in Antarctica, even our science projects, we have to plan 2 or 3 years in advance to make sure we have, especially the big projects, because you have to make sure you have the fuel in the right place, you must have to make sure you have the equipment in the right place, that you have funding to do the science, and that you have a plan, and that you really know what you're going to do, and that you have contingency planning if things go wrong or the weather's bad or something like that. So it is a phenomenal place where you have to be focused on planning to the extreme. I guess it's exactly the same for your expeditions.
Yeah, very similar. I think sometimes people assume that I'm a sort of thrill-seeking, adrenaline junkie, and actually, I spend months and years sort of planning to try and avoid any drama at all. And these, for me, these long journeys have been, traveling on foot, an exercise in efficiency, and trying to cover distance with all my. And as Jamie was saying, it's such a remote place and such a giant expanse of wilderness that the planning is key. Once you arrive, you better have everything you need with you, because there aren't any shops down there.
That's right, no shops. You have to take everything you need. And if you go out into a field camp where, some scientists stay in the stations to do their work, but most scientists are going from the main station, and then they go out further into remote field camps, and then you're in there with your tent and all your food, and with your team around you, and just with radio contact back to the main station.
You can't forget the matches.
No, that's right. Yeah.
It's something hard to explain, because the people probably don't understand. They don't have a supermarket in the corner. You have to take care about the minimum detail that could be critical in Antarctica. Most of my expeditions to Antarctica were in camps and not in the stations. I usually called the mall to the station, because you have everything, and the thing is, you can go to the field if you have. But one of the main characteristics of our national program is we want to approach to the phenomena in the field. So that means we have to prepare small camps, usually 4 people, to approach directly to the phenomena and to leave traces around the area. That's my impression. But hearing you, I know that probably you have to take care, but longer, 1 year before.
Yes,
I have the same box with all the stuff. You have it? You have your box with the same
yes,
stuff?
lots. Many boxes and bags, lots of equipment and clothing and skis and gear. Yes, and I quite enjoy that process. I often say, I will probably never have the chance to go into space, but Antarctica is probably the closest I will get to setting foot on a different planet. And you have to have all of your equipment, your sort of life support system with you. Because it's such a challenging environment. Yes, it's really not conducive to life at all in the interior on the high plateau. It's a very harsh climate. So to me, in some ways, part of the satisfaction from the experiences I've had has been in being able to operate and survive in those conditions where human beings shouldn't really be down there.
It's amazing how you can get used to it, though. Get used to the cold, isn't it? The first time you go there, and I remember being taken by a helicopter to the island where you're going to live for the next 6 weeks and do work, and you've been in a coolish station, base, and then you go into this island and the helicopter leaves and you stand there and you're cold and you're alone, and there's
I know that feeling.
And then you think, my goodness, how am I going to survive in this cold environment for the next weeks? And then by about 2 days' time, you're wearing a t-shirt sometimes, and you're wearing 1 layer of fleece instead of 10, and you gradually get really used to the cold, don't you?
Do.
And it's quite enjoyable then.
It is. It's a magical place. And I remember back in 2014, so at the very end of the season for us, it was sort of February 2014, we'd almost finished this enormous journey, 3.5 months. And my teammate Tak and I were lying in our tent one evening, and he was saying, can you imagine drinking water out of a glass? That's just going to be such a great thing to, imagine like sitting in a chair at a table, eating with a knife and fork, and all of these things that we thought would just be fantastic. So it's amazing how quickly you can adapt to very basic conditions. But also, to me, always amazing how quickly you take extraordinary luxury, for granted as well. When I flew down to Santiago 2 days ago, I was getting annoyed because the Wi-Fi on the plane wasn't working. And I had to remind myself that in Antarctica, you have to, if you're thirsty, you have to light a stove and melt some snow.
So, but beyond all this training, both are explorers in Antarctica. Have you crossed any particular moment where all this training and all this preparation was in jeopardy because of some difficult moment?
Ooh. You must have loads.
We've had a few, yeah. I mean, for me, one of the most challenging points of this big return journey to the South Pole we did from Ross Island in 2013, 2014, one of the most challenging parts was the Beardmore Glacier, which to me was also one of the most interesting parts. It's incredibly remote. And it took us, in the same way that it took Shackleton and Scott, from the Ross Ice Shelf, essentially at sea level, to the Antarctic Plateau. So that was the route that they found.
This
it
is 500 kilometers from the pole.
It's, oh gosh, I'm not sure.
A bit more
distance-wise.
Yes, it is
Yeah,
about
it's
that.
about that. Yes,
about
yeah,
that,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and the glacier itself is 200 kilometers long, so it's an enormous expanse of ice. And in some ways, it was amazing to be there. And of course, we had scenery for the first time in weeks. We had mountains and this incredible blue ice for much of it. So it was an incredible place to be and to experience. But it was also quite, for me personally, quite frightening as well. It was for Scott, for Shackleton, that was the bit that they found most challenging. It's heavily crevassed in places, and we didn't have a lot of data to go on in terms of route finding. We had some basic. One of our charts was from the United States Geological Survey from 1965, I think.
Gosh, changed by then. Yes.
So that was a challenging piece of terrain, and we were lucky, I think, that we never had any. One of Shackleton's ponies fell into a crevasse and died. So there were some stories that really worried us, and we both had minor crevasse falls. We were roped up most of the time, but that was always very frightening indeed. And one of the things about it, I think one of the things that makes Antarctica so compelling is it's very humbling. It's an enormous place, and it's a place where nature is sort of all powerful, and you feel very small as a human and very vulnerable. Yeah, there's something very special about that.
So have you had an experience, and you've been doing your work?
Oh, yeah, once. This exchange of temperature when you're walking a long distance. We had a camp in Byers Peninsula, in Livingston Island, in South Shetland Islands, and walking every day around 15 to 20 kilometers to one point, collecting some fossils and going back. But every day you have the heating and the exchange of temperature happened when you drink water from your can, very cold. So one piece of my teeth was broken with the difference of temperature. After 2 days, I had a serious pain and an infection. This is the kind of things that I feel infinitely small again, because we put the alarm, but it was impossible for the vessel who was far to the south in Adelaide Island. To the station, there was no conditions to fly with the choppers, so I slept only 1 hour in 2 days. And after the second day, I started the protocol to extract the teeth myself.
Oh, really?
Together with the rest of the guys there. So I started with 4 and I finished alone. Everybody ran off. So I have to replace my teeth after this, but it was a very bad experience. I don't want to repeat it.
I'll tell you a funny story though. When I was in a camp in the Transantarctic Mountains with 2 others, and we'd had a very long day and it was very dusty, and I wear contact lenses, and it's easier because they don't mist up when you go inside the tent. And my contact lenses are really dirty and they really hurt, and so I thought, right, I've got to take them out and clean them. And so I was in the tent, and I had the 2 holders, and I put saline. I put my contact lenses in the 2 holders, and then I put saline in there. It must have been just around a temperature for freezing, so I could see these 2 little pots of saline solution freezing with my contact lenses in there. So I was like, oh no! I now know it wouldn't have done any damage, but at that time I was really panicking. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, my contact lenses are going to be broken by shards of ice crystals going in them. So I need to put them somewhere warm. So without sort of thinking, I thought, warm place. So I put them in my mouth.
No.
Which was fine, because it was warm. But of course, what happened was all the saline melted, and I had a mouthful of water and 2 contact lenses floating around in my mouth. And then I had to work out how to get it out again.
But it was a solution finally.
Yeah, it was, and it worked, yes.
We have only 1 minute to finish, and I want to ask you if you have just a short message to the young people that is attending to this conference, and to the Chileans that want to explore a long country that we have, to explore Antarctica. to go beyond the limits. One of the beautiful things about paleontologists is breaking one of the four dimensions, this time. Do you have a short message?
I think there's so much we need to know about Antarctica. I think there's going to be several generations of young people who need to be good scientists and really want to know how important Antarctica is to the rest of the world, and really want to explore in a scientific way to try and understand what's going on. I think it's a big place, it's very important, there's so much more we need to know. So all of the young scientists who want to go to Antarctica, please just, educate well and think about what you can do, and go to Antarctica and help understand that amazing continent.
Well, I mean, same. I think I'm one of very few people who's ended up doing the things I dreamt of doing when I was a small boy. And there's nothing, I think, unique about me. I don't have a sort of family tree of famous explorers. There's no money. My dad was a construction worker. So I've just had, this vision and a lot of persistence and stubbornness and determination, and I've amazed myself in experiencing and seeing the things that I have. So I hope there's a story there about the importance of determination, especially when these big challenges and big goals seem so overwhelming. Yes, I would say go for it.
Thank you very much. This was a very nice conversation. You make it easier for me. Y a todos los que están en la casa quiero decirles que, bueno, aprovechen de empaparse con la experiencia de haber tenido estos dos grandes exploradores juntos acá. Creo que es un privilegio que difícilmente se repite. Así que, bueno, quedamos atentos para seguir adelante con otras conversaciones que van a ser de su interés. Muchas gracias por venir. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Pleasure.